I don't care what anyone tells me, this is the greatest and most hyped ending to a movie ever. But unfortunately, it wasn't to be, because it was a box office failure and one of many attempts from Universal to kickstart a monster franchise. The Dark Universe was Universal Pictures' ambitious attempt to create a shared universe akin to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but with classic monsters like Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Mummy. It aimed to modernize these characters for contemporary audiences. Dracula Untold was intended to kickstart this universe but received mixed reviews and didn't perform as expected. Similarly, The Mummy starring Tom Cruise faced critical backlash and struggled at the box office, leading to the indefinite pause of the Dark Universe project. So Dracula Untold reimagines the origin of one of literature's most iconic characters, Dracula, by drawing loose inspiration from the historical figure Vlad the Impaler. Vlad III, known as Vlad Dracula, was a 15th century ruler of Wallachia, renowned for his brutal defense of his territory against the Ottoman Empire. Vlad's brutal methods and fierce reputation were aimed at protecting his people and instilling fear in his enemies. His life, marked by conflict and survival, forms a stark foundation for the character of Dracula. In Dracula Untold, Vlad, played by Luke Evans, is depicted as a valiant prince and warrior, deeply committed to his family and kingdom. The film blends historical elements with supernatural fiction to craft an origin story. Vlad is initially shown as a benevolent ruler, trying to maintain peace and protect his people from the Ottoman threat. This portrayal contrasts sharply with his historical reputation as a ruthless leader. Faced with an impossible ultimatum from the Ottoman Sultan, surrender his son and 1,000 boys to the Ottoman army or face annihilation. Vlad turns to a dark power to save his kingdom. Seeking power, Vlad enters the cave of an ancient vampire portrayed by Charles Dance. He makes a pact, gaining the vampire's strengths and abilities at the cost of a thirst for human blood. This moment marks the birth of Dracula, blending the historical Vlad's desperate actions with the supernatural elements of vampire lore. The film's depiction of Vlad is not just of a monster, but of a man pushed to extremes to protect his loved ones and realm. Vlad's transformation is portrayed as a sacrifice, undertaken out of love for his family and subjects. This adds a layer of tragedy and depth to his character. Throughout the film, Vlad battles his new vampiric urges, trying to retain his humanity while wielding his newfound powers to defeat his enemies. This struggle is central to the film's narrative, emphasizing his reluctant acceptance of his dark fate. Dracula Untold distinguishes itself from traditional Dracula narratives by embracing a heavily action-oriented approach, a significant departure from the more contemplative and psychological explorations typical of the character. The film prioritizes visually stunning and high-energy battle scenes, using Vlad's supernatural abilities to create epic, visually captivating conflicts. These sequences showcase his transformation into a vampire with dramatic flair, but they often overshadow the deeper, more introspective elements of his character. By focusing on Vlad's battles and physical prowess, the film simplifies the narrative to one of a hero's journey. This contrasts sharply with the complex and often morally ambiguous nature of Dracula in traditional lore. In Bram Stoker's Dracula, immortality is depicted as a double-edged sword. While it grants eternal life and power, it also condemns Dracula to an existence of eternal longing and detachment from humanity. The Count's immortality is a source of both his strength and his profound suffering. The film briefly touches on the curse of immortality, primarily through Vlad's initial reluctance to embrace his new powers. However, it largely glosses over the existential weight of living forever. Instead, immortality is portrayed more as a tool for achieving immediate, tangible goals like defeating enemies and protecting loved ones. Loneliness is a pervasive theme in classic Dracula tales. The vampire's isolation, stemming from his need to hide his true nature and his predatory existence, is a central element of his tragedy. This loneliness is often depicted through his interactions with others, highlighting his inability to form genuine, lasting connections. While Vlad's actions are driven by his desire to save his family and kingdom, the film doesn't deeply explore the enduring loneliness that would accompany his immortal condition. His struggles are more focused on immediate threats and the external conflict he faces, rather than the internal desolation that is intrinsic to Dracula's character in traditional stories. Sexual expression and seduction are integral to Dracula's character in classic literature and film adaptations. His interactions with victims often carry a strong undercurrent of eroticism, symbolizing the forbidden and the allure of the unknown. The film largely sidelines this dimension of Dracula's character. The focus remains on action and heroism, with little attention given to the seductive and erotic elements that have historically defined Dracula. This omission removes a significant aspect of the character's complexity and the thematic richness of the traditional Dracula mythos. In Stoker's novel, Count Dracula is a figure of profound psychological depth. His immortality brings not just power, but endless ennui and detachment. The themes of seduction, the fear of the unknown, and the clash between modernity and ancient evil are intricately woven into the narrative. The Count's encounters with Jonathan Harker, Mina, and Lucy delve into his multifaceted nature, simultaneously monstrous and pitiable. Films like Nosferatu and Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992 emphasize Dracula's eerie, otherworldly presence and the psychological horror he embodies. These portrayals focus on the Count's manipulation, his seductive power, and the existential dread he inspires. Dracula Untold excels in its visual presentation, creating an immersive experience that complements its dark fantasy narrative. The film's gothic aesthetic is a standout feature, evoking the eerie and foreboding tone typical of classic Dracula tales. The use of shadow and light, particularly in the castle scenes and the vampire's lair, amplifies the sense of mystery and danger. Sweeping aerial shots of Transylvanian landscapes, coupled with close-up shots that emphasize the character's emotions, creates a visually dynamic experience. Charles Dance's portrayal of the master vampire stands out as a high point in the film, bringing a sense of genuine horror and gravitas to the narrative. Dance's commanding presence and deep, resonant voice lend an air of menace and authority to the master vampire. His character exudes an ancient, almost regal quality, suggesting a deep history and immense power. Dance's performance also serves as a stark contrast to Luke Evans' Vlad. While Vlad is portrayed as a conflicted, reluctant hero, the master vampire is a figure fully immersed in his monstrous nature, providing a glimpse into the potential future that awaits Vlad. Dracula Untold is designed as a dark fantasy action film rather than a traditional horror movie. This genre blending contributes to its lack of genuine scares and horror elements typically expected from a Monster Universe franchise. The film prioritizes high-energy action scenes and epic battles over atmospheric tension and psychological horror. This focus on spectacle over suspense reduces the potential for creating genuinely frightening experiences. By portraying Vlad as a heroic figure, the film diminishes the inherent menace traditionally associated with Dracula. A sympathetic and relatable protagonist who fights to save his family and kingdom does not evoke the same fear as a predatory, morally ambiguous vampire. Classic horrors often thrive on ambiguity and the unknown, elements that are largely absent in Dracula Untold. The clear delineation of good and evil, with Vlad firmly on the side of good, removes the unsettling uncertainty that can make horrors so effective. For a monster film to be truly frightening, it must incorporate several key elements that Dracula Untold largely overlooks. Genuine horror often relies on building a sense of dread and tension. This can be achieved through eerie settings, suspenseful music, and pacing that allows for moments of quiet fear to build. Dracula Untold lacks these slower, tension-building sequences, opting instead for fast-paced action. Exploring the psychological aspects of fear, such as the protagonist's inner turmoil, paranoia, and descent into madness, is crucial. Dracula's struggle with his own nature, his fear of losing his humanity, and his potential for monstrous acts could have added a deeper layer of horror. While the film includes supernatural abilities and creatures, it treats these elements more as superpowers than sources of horror. The portrayal of vampirism as a heroic power undermines its potential as a terrifying curse. Effective horror needs a truly menacing antagonist. While Charles Dance's master vampire adds some level of horror, the main antagonists, primarily the Ottoman army and Mehmed II, are more traditional military foes rather than sources of supernatural fear. The film doesn't have many genuinely scary moments. Jump scares, eerie atmospheres, and the slow realization of impending doom are minimal or absent. The narrative focus on Vlad's heroic journey and his transformation into a savior for his people shifts the tone away from the horror. The audience is meant to root for Vlad, reducing the sense of fear and unease. Horror often thrives on unpredictability. Dracula Untold follows a relatively straightforward plot with few surprising twists or moments of shocking revelation that could contribute to a horror atmosphere. The primary antagonist in Dracula Untold is Mehmed II, the Ottoman Sultan, portrayed by Dominic Cooper. Despite being positioned as the main villain, Mehmed lacks the menacing presence needed to truly elevate the narrative. His motivations are straightforward, primarily driven by political and military conquest, which, while historically accurate, do not imbue the character with the depth or terror that a supernatural antagonist might offer. The film misses opportunities to explore Mehmed's character in ways that could heighten the stakes and the horror elements. For example, a deeper exploration of his relationship with Vlad or any personal vendettas could have added layers to his character, making him more menacing and his threat more palpable. Dracula Untold heavily relies on action sequences to drive its plot. While these sequences are visually impressive and contribute to the film's entertainment value, they often come at the expense of deeper storytelling and character development. The fast-paced battles and special effects overshadow moments that could have been used to explore the characters' inner conflicts and motivations. The film's focus on action leaves little room for meaningful character development. Vlad's transformation into Dracula is depicted through his newfound powers and heroic actions, but his internal struggle with his vampiric nature and the moral implications of his actions are not fully explored. The concept of a dark universe, an interconnected franchise featuring classic Universal monsters, faced significant hurdles following the lackluster reception of both Dracula Untold and The Mummy. Both films received mixed to negative reviews from critics. Dracula Untold was criticized for its lack of depth and over-reliance on action, while The Mummy was panned for its convoluted plot and failure to balance horror with action-adventure elements. Neither film met the commercial expectations necessary to justify a large-scale, interconnected universe. The Mummy, despite featuring star power with Tom Cruise, failed to perform strongly at the box office to convince Universal Pictures of the franchise's viability. Characters like Dracula, the Mummy, and Frankenstein's monster have rich backstories and complex psychologies that can be explored in depth. Giving these characters nuanced, multi-layered portrayals can attract audiences looking for more than just surface-level action. The future of the Dark Universe is not without potential, but it requires careful rethinking and strategic approach. By learning from the challenges faced by Dracula Untold and The Mummy, and drawing lessons from the MCU's success, Universal Pictures can still revive its iconic monsters in a way that captivates audiences, and hopefully take over from the decadent MCU, embracing horror, focusing on character depth, establishing a cohesive vision, and building the universe patiently are key steps towards realizing a successful monster franchise.